It was your white parents, your rich school, who your grandfather was. That is the reason for your lovely, comfortable, middle-class life on your 1.5 holidays a year. And we sold young people this idea that investing their time, investing their money is going to make them employable in the long run. But that was clearly not the case.
Hypothetically, we're on the verge of signing a contract and they say, you've got 30 days, we're going to replace you with AI.
They might have spent those tokens unwisely, but they spent them because they're very serious about getting rid of your job. That's how serious they are of getting rid of you. They basically commit career suicide in front of the very obviously moving AI train.
Give me a percentage as to how much the advertising and marketing industry contracts because people perceive it to be replaceable.
I'm cynical enough to suggest that much of our successful white-collar world of work is nothing more than gentrified, sanitized, and legalized extraction. Bullshit jobs, they extract value. The whole advertising industry has just stripped all of its value out and focused on the indefensible ground instead of the defensible ground, which is undefinable. I think the scale is not on the side of agencies that have scaled the low margins, high volumes industry of social media and digitization. But if there is wealth accruing on one side of a moat, that's a target. The few people that can continue hoarding wealth are fewer and fewer, and you can't compete based on extortion and exploiting whatever little shards of privilege you have left. But we've been lied to. The value was always in the talent, the creative, the story. That's the defensible ground. It's subtle, very human, and it's where all value lies. The only thing you can do now is to shift your mindset from looking for a job with the skill sets to saying,
Bronwyn, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us on Never Think Alone. You've referred to yourself as a court jester in some of your writing. What does that mean to you?
I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with Jim O'Shaughnessy, who I got friends with on Twitter when it was still Twitter. And he always said, every time I spoke to him, you can tell people the truth, but you have to make them laugh or they'll kill you. So that's the other side. That's why you have to bring the jester into it. You can be a truth teller, but you have to do it with a sense of humor and humility if you hope to have your message land and still keep your head.
Yeah. So live amongst the people still after the fact. That's great. When you were a little girl, you wanted to be a spy.
Absolutely. I might even be one now.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. So what would young Bronwyn think of your career now?
Yes, I think she'll be both disappointed, but also have a good sense of humor about it. It's like the good old genie wishes, you get what you wish for, but if you weren't very specific about what you wished for, the sort of vision that you thought you were getting isn't exactly what you really wanted, but it is what you spoke about. And I wanted two things that are small. I wanted to be a rock star and a spy. I was quite adamant we could do both. And as it turns out, I do make a living observing people and selling secrets, and also standing on stages. So, if you just looked at the pictures, I could probably fool 10-year-old me. Yeah. But in reality, it's not quite the same thing, but the same kind of archetype, I suppose. Same direction of travel, different degree of fame and fortune.
Yeah, we have that in common. So I wanted to be a rock star. I wouldn't say a spy, but I assumed I'd be a journalist one day.
Close enough, yeah.
And I also heard that you were a primary school music teacher.
I was, while I was studying. I figured out that I didn't actually need to be in those lecture halls. I have a very cynical view as to higher education. And I do say that as someone who was the straight A kid in school, got, in all the subjects, math, sciences, whatever's. When you go to the guidance counselor and say, what should I do? And they're like, well, you could do anything you like. And you're like, well, thanks very much. But university was largely a waste of time. I saw very quickly that it was not teaching me anything that I didn't already know, hadn't already figured out. So I didn't spend much time going to the lectures. I did, of course, graduate, got my BCom degree, but I worked as a music teacher while I was studying commerce. So I suppose it's a bit of a broad perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, you've described yourself as a generalist, and I'm going to have to read off the list. I mean, I'm sure everyone else introduces you this way too at all the different speaking events that you do. And I guess the summary of it is polymath. But here I've got economist, futurist, author, lecturer, guest lecturer, marketer, business trends analyst. And of course, we talked about the kind of stance as the court jester. All of these different things. What do you think is the common thread through all of these various practices that you bring together as a generalist? What's the thing that winds them all together?
Well, I can kind of give you two answers there. The one being, I do describe myself as a futurist and economist, and I do, despite my complete cynicism to the world of academia, actually hold qualifications in both of those things. And largely, I think, just slightly perversely, I got the qualifications so that you can talk credibly to people that have them, right? So that you can talk to people on their own level, even if you do have some cynicism as to what the piece of paper actually means. But less sort of professionally, I describe myself as a reader, writer, and speaker, which is quite an old-fashioned way of looking at the world. But essentially, I describe myself as an observer who has managed to find a way to eke out a living doing that, which is why the analogy of the court jester makes a lot of sense. I've got a couple of friends also in the speaking business who have a similar worldview to me, and that's effectively what we do. We sort of sing for our supper in quite hallowed halls in different parts of the world to very important, powerful people in politics and business. But essentially, our entire economic existence is based on saying something smart and witty enough to get invited back the next time. Or if you get kicked out for saying something too witty, finding someone else who'll take you in for a bit.
So you've got these qualifications, and it feels like you've really equipped yourself for at least the world that we live in right now. And to me, I personally have struggled. I think most of my career, it sounds cliche now because everybody says it, but I've struggled with imposter syndrome. I've struggled with like, I don't know enough. I don't understand enough. I'm not going to be able to, go toe to toe at this particular professional level. Have you ever struggled with that? Do you ever struggle with those insecurities?
Not so much that I don't know things. I think I was aware quite early on in life that I probably knew more things than most people. I've never had an imposter syndrome in that regard, but that's simply because I read more when I was little than other people did, which means I did actually know more things than compared to people that had just watched, KTV. And of course I knew more stuff than they did. So that's not the thing. But what I have struggled with constantly is this idea of, am I doing something that's actually of value? And that's a much harder thing to sit with, especially for someone that has the skill sets and the background and the support, and the education, all these things to be ambitious and to be successful. You have to kind of sit with what that ambition actually is for. And on the economic side of my brain, and again, we can talk about how futures and economics are essentially looking at the same thing, which is what's happening next, but from different lenses. It's impossible once you've seen and understood enough to ignore the fact that so much of our economy is based on extracting other people's hoards of gold as opposed to actually contributing anything. The incentives are very misaligned. And especially if you're smart and well-connected, there are so many temptations to join that world and to just take. And it's really interesting. I've been reading quite a lot lately about our informal economy. You can use that in inverted commas. I mean, I think it's very formalized, but very successful. But it's this idea of kind of, there's always two routes. If you can't get ahead doing real work, you can always take a shortcut, which is effectively engaging in kind of criminal activity. But I'm cynical enough to suggest that much of our successful white-collar world of work is nothing more than gentrified, sanitized, and legalized, except essentially sort of extraction. And that's a lot harder. Now you kind of left figuring out what can you do that's actually worth adding value at this time. And I suppose that's why, again, come back to this world of doing what I do as a court jester, which is a very honest way of earning a living. You get paid if you entertain, you don't, right? You earn your supper one plate at a time, which is something I'm able to kind of live with. But having worked in different industries, that's the hard one. Once you understand, once you know, you can't unknow your place in the world.
Yeah. Well, you certainly really added a lot of value to me. I was telling you about how I've experienced your book, obviously with Sharon Pierce. You wrote a book called Survive the AI Apocalypse, a guide for solutionists. And this book has certainly helped me in recent months. I bought it a while ago and it kind of sat for a bit, and I touched on it, but I'm going to come back to a scenario that I've had to apply it in. And I will really want to chat to you through the detail. But before we get there, what I'd like to know in terms of value and value creation, in the world that we live in right now, what would you say somebody in the audience right now should be considering as actual value? So let's say that's not the scenario where AI takes our jobs and replaces us. What's real meaningful value versus the bullshit value that we'll get to in more detail? Let's start with, like, how do you define creating value in the world?
Well, there's a lot of ways to describe it, but I think we could go back to like basic economics 101. And economists get a bad rap all the time because people don't understand what economists do, which is largely to observe and report. Where economists should and do have a bad rap is when they dabble into the more kind of normative side in terms of pushing policy agendas, which is not about describing the laws of nature, but rather trying to manipulate and redistribute who wins and who loses, which is a very different conversation. But at its sort of basics, that basic idea of like capitalism, which is again one of those super dirty words, is premised on the idea of free and fair trade. So we can criticize capitalism all we like, but the idea of free and fair trade that sits underneath that is probably a very good way to look at where value is. And that's the idea that through free and fair trade, it's the only way that two parties who interact, to have a transaction, can both walk away better off or with increased utility, to use a sort of economic term. And you'll understand when you start sitting with that, how few of the interactions in your life actually leave you feeling, both parties feeling like they've walked away better off. So this can apply to monetary transactions and non-monetary transactions, to your personal life, to your professional life, to whatever work you do. Is your idea of trade, is your business model, is the money you take home, the salary you take, the contracts that you make, based on you winning compared to the person you're negotiating with or selling, you extracting as much value as you can from your customer, from the consumer, we like to use those words? Is it based on trying to get more than market value out of your suppliers? Or is it based on fruitful trade where both parties end up better off because we've exchanged a different set of goods and skills that we wouldn't have been able to have without that transaction? So the classic example is, of course, go back to our agrarian sort of history. You grow apples, I grow oranges. If we don't trade, I just have to have orange juice every day, and you have to eat apple pie every day. But if we trade, we can both have a glass of orange juice and a piece of pie. We're both better off. That's a value increasing trade. There's not somebody that's winning and someone that's losing. But when our games start to descend into sort of zero-sum games, where somebody is winning and somebody is losing, where the employee is not paid quite enough, maybe they paid underneath minimum wage because you can pay them cash or because they're a foreigner, or vice versa, maybe you're employed and you're working from home on Friday, but rarely you're out on the golf course. You know, those are not fair value exchanges. Someone's winning and someone's losing. And that's the simplest way to figure out whether what you're doing is adding value or not. And that value could be very non-material. It could be simply you're a comedian and you made people laugh and feel good and they gave you money for that. And both of you were better off. One person felt better after a terrible day. The other person was able to pay his rent. That's fine. But if that exchange was fair, but if that comedian showed up, or like many of our pop stars do, totally drunk and unable to deliver the show, that's not a value-adding transaction anymore. Now it's an unfair trade. And so much of our world is premised on unfair trade, largely often to do with systems, to do with legacies, to do with, you know, all those things that academics talk about, but also to do with the choices that we make and how we approach the work that we do, the value that we deliver, and our interactions with fundamentally other human beings.
If I were to try to summarize that as a strategist, as somebody who has tried to add value, right?
Yeah.
Tried to create value. And I've used that expression for many years. Like, one of the ways that I like to convey this is like, I think what you're saying as well is like perceived value, like how
it's in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. And the recipient of that value, obviously has to set a price. And what tends to happen is, over time, once you have explored different ways to add value and create value, and I found this even as an entrepreneur, as you said, the temptation is there. And in simple terms, like once you've figured out, hey, wait, I can exploit this now.
There are lots of ways to exploit. Lots of incentives.
You've got to have strong moral fiber to avoid that. What are some of those principles that you would, for yourself, only personally, recommend? Because, as an example, let's say, that you can get paid more for a gig. Right. And it's really hard to say no. It's really hard to say no when you know that you could potentially get more for it than somebody else is paying you. And if that information is owned by you, you don't have to share it necessarily with the clients. A new client comes along, you charge them more. What's at risk? If you're so extractive, in this kind of capitalist situation, like, what do you think you're risking if you don't apply that kind of moral fiber in that situation?
Well, that's the interesting premise of the time that we're in at the moment, which is why we wrote this book now and not a while ago. There's always been inefficiencies. There's always been privileges that you could trade upon. But our contention is at the moment that two of the primary sources of privilege, which is sort of unequal access to information or power that can be exploited, like you said, and it usually is because we're human beings. And, we take the path of least resistance. We don't always take the moral high ground. But the point is that exploitation of that privilege, whether it's financial privilege, status privilege, privilege of being tall or handsome, whatever it is, all of these sorts of things are noticed by the market. And the market, from a purely economic perspective, is always looking to get a piece of that privilege, right? Because the privilege is where the pile of potential cash and wealth lies. And we have several ways to try and get at that stuff. The one is through just straight up sort of meritocracy, which we can challenge, in terms of the reality of the world. But the other is through technological advancement and through, of course, migration, which is really interesting, right? So if you don't have any opportunities in your hometown, what do? You go to the big city. If your economy isn't growing as much as the one next door, well, you cross the border legally or illegally. You will go to where the opportunity is. Money will do the same thing. It will migrate to where the highest capital returns are, into fights with the financial influencers on South African social media all the time saying, the best thing you can do for your future is to take your money and invest it offshore. Like, if that's what you do, then that's where all the money is going to go. Do you understand that, you're a function of the consequences of your action? But that's just to illustrate that opportunities flow across borders. And thanks to advances in technology, computing power, just planes, trains, automobiles, and boats, the more migration of people and money there is, the more competition there is, and the less your previous modes of privilege kind of hold up. And at the moment, both globalization from a monetary sort of perspective of the economy and technology from the goods side of the economy, or at least the service side of the economy, are making huge inroads into attacking previously stored piles of privilege, which is the best way to sort of describe that. So whether you are moral or not actually becomes irrelevant, whether you're taking the high ground or not. If someone else can do whatever you're doing and take advantage of what you thought that you had earned through unearned effort, well, someone is going to do that, because competition flows regardless of what we want. We can try put tariffs up. We can try literally build walls. I know Cape Town's trying, even if the US didn't get it right. We can try build those things to keep ourselves and our position and our status and our jobs and our profit margins safe. But if there is wealth accruing on one side of a moat and not on another, that's a target. And what has happened with recent advances in technology is those targets have become hittable. for a whole lot of people that didn't necessarily have those firepower before, whether you are a pariah state in the Middle East that can now use DIY drones to contend with the world's biggest army on a very literal sense, or whether you are a knowledge worker that now has a cell phone, that is a smart kid living in some other continent that can do the work that you've been doing, just thanks to your position for geographically and socially speaking, for a lot more money. Well, you've got a whole lot more competition now. So that means unless you are feeling incredibly lucky, unless you are really the tallest crab in the crab bucket, this is a very good time for us to reckon with where we have perhaps been extracting rather than adding value, because my contention is what is happening in the so-called K-shaped economy that Peter Atwood has been talking about for quite a long time is that the upwards bar of the K, the few people that can continue hoarding wealth, are fewer and fewer, and more people are finding themselves in the competing space. And you can't compete based on extortion in a competitive market. You can only compete in an uncompetitive market. And for most of us, the market is becoming more competitive, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of the temptation goes out the window. A lot of the inequality goes out the window. We're talking about most of us. We're not talking about the 5 or 6 billionaires who own the AI companies, but I'm sorry, if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably not one of them. Not to insult your listeners, but we're not talking to you. We're talking to the people who have to figure out a way to trade and to survive going forward. And my contention is exploiting whatever little shards of privilege you have left is not a hugely sustainable game.
Yeah, if Elon, if you are listening, this is not for you.
Not for you. Not for you and your kids, you're okay.
Yeah.
But for those of us who have to work or trade for a living, whichever ones you disinherited might be interested.
So, hypothetically, I own a business and I received a signal from the market, as I would describe it. A client calls us up one day. We're on the verge of signing a contract, and I've signed the contract. I'm ready to go. We've agreed on terms. It's a long-standing client. We're talking many years, 5 years more. The day that they're supposed to sign the contract, countersign, they give us notice and they say, you've got 30 days. We're going to replace you with AI. This is a web development contract. And Claude Code is released a few months earlier. The perception in the market is that we're no longer perceived as valuable for this particular service. So the client decides, we're going to give you notice. In that scenario, there are a number of things at play, but let's say the perception is the most important part. And as you defined value earlier, they just don't think it's valuable anymore. They might change their minds later.
When they've tried and it's a bit expensive, yes.
Yeah. But hypothetically, this has happened.
Yep.
And there are people who used to have roles. You know, this is now a big contract. And there's lots of opportunity for them on a day-to-day to learn, to grow, to perfect their skill as engineers. They don't have that opportunity anymore. One, what would your advice be to me in that context, while I've got you? And two, even more importantly, what would your advice be to the people who were day-to-day given the opportunity to operate as engineers, and they no longer have that? They've got to change somehow because supposedly this market perceives them to no longer be valuable in that role. What's your advice for me, and what's your advice for them?
Okay, so first of all, yes, value does lie in the eye of the beholder. You cannot make someone or something, because companies are things, not people, generally, they profit maximizing entities, believe that you're valuable any more than you can make someone love you. You know, like think about like any healthy human relationship. You can't make that person stay. That's not healthy. In fact, that's entirely illegal to force someone, to stop someone from leaving. The same thing happens in the world of free and fair business. If you're not perceived as being valuable, you're not perceived as being valuable. But you do have a few things available to you. And that is that maybe website is no longer perceived as valuable to that customer. But what is? And I know that if we speak a lot about the sort of communications and marketing industry, I've been like so bemused watching so many of my friends in this industry absolutely devalue themselves, basically commit career suicide in front of the very obviously moving AI train. It's been so funny to me to watch the advertising industry position itself as a procurer of digital advertisement distribution, instead of remembering that the value was always in the talent, the creative, the story, because that's the defensible ground. Like, we understand that, like, even now that we have synthetic diamonds, blood diamonds are still pretty valuable. And they're really just a rock. They don't have any much utility value, especially now we can make more pointy ones in a microwave. You know, you can do that. But we still want the things. We still want gold. We want the shiny stones, not because they have intrinsic utility, but because they have value to the beholder. Again, there's rarity, there's story, all the rest of it. And something that's much more useful and practical, like water, is sold a lot cheaper until you're actually starving or drowning in the desert. That's the classic sort of economic proposition. Why are diamonds so expensive and water is so cheap? You clearly need water. Nobody needs a freaking stone, but the stone is expensive because it's got a story attached to it. And the value is in the story. So figuring out what your actual value is now your job as the leader of your organization. And I'll tell you, anything that can be digitized, can be commoditized, and can effectively have its value dropped down to cost. It's not costless because AI is actually running on real resources, but those real resources have an actual finite cost, and digitization drives things down to the finite cost. And if you focus on trying to cost cut that finite cost, of course, you're going to run into a situation where you're not getting any value out of any exchange because you can't live off the scraps that are left. But the value proposition is entirely different. If the value proposition is actually an idea, that's like a diamond or like an emerald. Let's say emeralds because, you know, they become more rare. All those fancy conch pearls that you can't microwave up in the microwave anymore, like the diamonds. But that's where the value is. It's intrinsic, not just extrinsic. Anything that is definable is at risk of being digitizable. And as I said, I've just found it so hilarious how the whole advertising industry has deliberately, and without anyone forcing it to, just stripped all of its value out and focused on the indefensible ground instead of the defensible ground, which is undefinable, it's subtle, it's very human, and it's where all value lies in an increasingly digitized world. Every brand is facing the same cost pressure. How do you differentiate yourself? The whole idea of a brand was always this thing of adding extra value without changing the actual product. It was always in the story. So how are you repositioning the value that you're actually selling, which can't be compared cost to cost? It's incomparable. You're in a category of one. I suppose it's also something that's part of my personal philosophy is I don't compete. If there's a competition, I'm not really interested in being in it. You judge me as a category of one, and then we can have a conversation. So, you know, like what is that? What is the actual value that you're delivering? If the value is a website, they don't have value in that anymore. You got to go do something else. The very same thing applies to those employees. And this is a much harsher conversation because companies, even if it's your company, even if you are an owner of a company, you don't understand it's a non-natural asset and it can shift along with the market. If the value's here, we can go shift there and do that. But for a person, there's a lot more sunk cost and it's a lot more personal. The skills that you've developed, the career that you have is so internalized with so much of your ego, your self-worth, your self-actualization, and all this time you've spent in something that simply like feels like the floor is disappearing beneath you. But at the same time, the sooner you have that understanding of what the defensible ground is and what's not, you can move. And there's no point in standing on indefensible ground. Whether we see these problems with like unions who want to unionize to stop the march of progress, they might succeed, but they succeed only in harming themselves because it means the country that bowed to those demands falls behind, and their whole standard of living at a global level ends up falling behind when we start to get to those points. As individuals, you can complain and you can try and increase your price, but it doesn't make you any more employable if you're still trying to defend a set of skills that no longer has value. Again, that's not to say you don't have options, but you have to redefine what your value actually is. In the engineering and coding space, this angers me greatly because many educators and politicians, and like even your King Charleses, let them work in IT or build solar panels or whatever. That sort of very sort of top-down way of looking at things is very short-sighted, because skills in the short term are often the sorts of skills that stay in the short term because there's a need for a particular moment in time that the whole market is shifting. And we have invested a lot of time telling young people to study computer engineering. I mean, we even called it computer engineering. Talk about a marketing con there, that certainly made a lot of money for the universities who sold these programs. And we sold young people this idea that investing their time, investing their money is going to make them employable in the long run. But that was clearly not the case. There are skills that have long half-lives and there are skills that have short half-lives. Skills that have short half-lives solve a problem right now. And there's no problem investing in those, but best you understand that. And for your engineers, that's one option they can look at. They can say, yes, the half-life of my skills right now in the web development space is limited. There are only a few boomers, laggards, and Luddites that will not use Claude to build their website. And I hope you don't use Claude because he's very sycophantic and you really shouldn't be doing that. Don't support the creepy PR companies. That's a side note. Nonetheless, there's a bot that can build it for you, but there's some people that won't want to use the bots. Let me go find them. Let me go find the people that can't do this themselves and help them. I can set up a training program as how to use your bot to build a website. You can always get into the training seat, but you could also say, this is a short-term skill. This is a transitional skill, and this is a short-term career. And then I'm going to have to learn something else. And where that makes sense is a lot of people that are in that tech and IT space understand that and understand they're doing short-term qualifications to solve a small problem, and they develop a new specific skill to solve the next specific problem. So the mental shift, the skill I have evolves with the market, not the skill was supposed to be the end of education and the beginning of my employment plain sailing journey, which is a mental shift you have to make. The other thing is to assess your skills currently and say, how does the skill set I have solve an entirely different problem in an entirely different industry, which is not building websites, but it's using the fundamental logic of coding to solve other problems in other ways, whether that's looking at policy now at this stage or whatever the case is. What is the actual real value behind the skill, and focusing a new career on that? That becomes more exciting. So I had this conversation after one of my book events with a young girl who was literally sobbing in tears at the end of our conversation. And she was like, I've just studied film editing and I can't get a job. And you're telling me I'm not going to get a job. And I'm like, that's true. You're not going to get a job. And she's like, why won't you tell me what I want to hear? I've just spent 4 years of my life doing this. Well, firstly, you shouldn't have spent 4 years. Nobody should be going to school for 4 years to learn how to edit video. We've overinflated our academia, but you've done that. You've sunk that cost. The only thing you can do now is to shift your mindset from looking for a job with the skill sets to saying, how do I compete with the person that won't give me a job? Because if they can do my part of that business with AI, can I do the boss's part of his job with AI and compete with the guy as an equal? And then instead of looking for a boss, looking for a client, looking for a project, or what else can I do? I'm smart, I'm capable, I've got brains in my head and feet in my shoes. And what other things can I do? Maybe not with the skills that I've paid to learn, but with my connections, with my friends that I've made along the way, with my now understanding of how the world works. What else could I do? So this is not a simple conversation, but it's a conversation of saying two things ultimately to both of you, exactly the same thing. Get off the indefensible ground really quickly. Don't waste a second trying to defend value. That's like trying to make your girlfriend stay in the house when she's had enough of you. You can't do that. Let it go, move on. And the other part is figure out what is the actual value that you're selling. And it's probably not what you're currently invoicing for now. And this is what's also frustrates you, because so many of the economists and politicians and they have these ridiculous articles. Like, what's this latest one in The Economist? They floating around now saying, oh, just study philosophy, Anthropic's going to hire you. They're not going to hire you. This is nonsense. This is cope talking. And this is not the time for cope. This is the time for moving. If you are standing on ground that is shifting, you need to get off it. And people that say it's going to be fine, just wait it out. Oh, those companies have burned through so many AI tokens. Oh, lol, they should have stuck to the humans. You're missing the point. They might have spent those tokens unwisely, but they spent them because they're very serious about getting rid of your job. That's how serious they are of getting rid of you. That's what you've got to take away. That's not a nice conversation, but we've been lied to. I think especially anyone under the age of 45. So basically all your millennials and Gen Zs, I think the alphas already know what's going on. They're going to be okay. But we've been lied to about how the world works and about what your contribution is and what success looks like and what you need to do in order to get forward. As long as you're doubling down on those sunk costs, you're not securing your own future. You're not understanding what has shifted. So figure out what is indefensible real quickly, and then figure out what your actual value proposition is. And the challenging thing to a lot of people who have been successful so far, basically trading off their privilege, and a lot of people don't understand that, but you have been. It was your white parents. It was your rich school. It was who your grandfather was. It was the country you were born into, an economic tide that lifted you up. That is the reason for your lovely, comfortable, middle-class life and your 1.5 holidays a year. And understanding that is the first step to figuring out where the real value is in your story. And if you can figure that out, you have a very defensible future, but it might be smaller scale than what you used to. It might feel like you're going backwards, but if you're going backwards onto solid ground as opposed to sinking quicksand, you've got a very different future ahead. And what worked before is not going to work going forward for most people. There's a few people that are going to be really lucky. The shareholders and the owners of the biggest companies that take the biggest share in things, but it doesn't apply to most of us. Most of us have to figure something else out. So that sucks. I'm sorry. It sucks for a lot of people. A lot of people have been lied to. I did see this. I did have a real job, surprisingly enough. I did work for kind of crazy small businesses, but still nonetheless, sort of figured out it was safer in the water than it was in the boat from a sort of career perspective. Early enough on, but likewise, businesses are in the same thing, just on a bigger scale, trying to figure out what part of your business was actually just based on the fire side of our economy, which is largely based on how do I extract tolls from the poor and the middle classes, as opposed to what am I actually doing to serve, to build, to grow, to help. And a great way to start is to actually sit down with your customer or with your boss or whoever is paying your bills and saying, do you see me as a cost? Or do you see me as an asset? And if you do see me as a cost, what would I have to do in order to be valuable to you?
Have that conversation.
Which is a terrifying conversation, but at the same time, it's so essential. Imagine someone had sat you down if you were 25 years old in your first job and said, I see you as a cost. You're basically taking you on as an apprentice. You're going to cost me money for the next 5 years. I'm prepared to invest in you because I see you can become this. But this is what you'll have to do in order to actually be valuable to me or to anyone else. No one does that. And what do your customers think of you? This is something Sharon talks about all the time. They might be paying your bills now, but are they looking for a way to get rid of you? Like the web guys telling you this is far too much money. This website thing isn't worth that much to me. How do I do it cheaper? But having that conversation before you have that conversation that you're talking about, say, what is the actual value of this relationship? What are you hoping to get? And when you move on to, we want to, grow market share. We want to develop our business in this direction. How do we partner to do that? That's a productive conversation.
Yeah, and being seen as a partner, being seen as somebody who creates value. What I've heard you talk about is that sunk cost fallacy, at least when it comes to the individual. It applies to the business too.
It does, just a different scale.
Yeah. And for the audience, what we're saying there is if you're in a position where it feels like you've invested so much time and so much effort and you've learned something, or you feel this anchoring towards something that you've already spent so much time on and effort, it's really hard to turn away from it. Like, it's human nature, right? To feel like, actually, I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep trying that.
But there's ways around that. Like, you've learned something along the way that's not just the top line skill that's currently on your job description. Whatever you were doing, you learned something. You learned how to negotiate with your peers. You learned how to present to clients. What are the things you can take with you out of that? It would be different for every person, but it's the stuff that makes you uniquely valuable, like that unique blood diamond or emerald that, like, no one else has that story. No one else has that blood, sweat, and tears that's followed that direction. What have you actually learned along the way? Not the commoditizable plug and play skills you got from the Technicon, but what have you actually learned how to do? What problems have you learned how to solve? And that's a very different thing. So even on the website thing, it's like any piece of code can build a website. Maybe it's not going to look great, maybe it'll break, whatever, but they can figure that out. It is ultimately going to be commoditizable. But the art of getting someone to actually love that website and share it to their friends, the stuff that takes place off page that can't be tracked, those other conversations around it. Have you learned how to do that? Have you learned how to get people to notice what you're doing? What part of your work is not definable? And everyone's got that, or at least not entirely replicable. So have a look at your skill set. You'll be surprised at the stuff that you've learned along the way, the conversations you've had, the friends you've made, the things you've learned how to navigate, those subtle human things. And most things come down to the ability to sell, to persuade, to make, or to build, ultimately. And to make or build real things. Sorry, engineers. The things we build in the engineering world are means to getting the real stuff. We might just be further away from the chain, depending on where you are in the economy. But ultimately, yes. Of course, yeah. The banker sells to the realtor, who sells to the restaurateur, who sells food to the person. Sooner along the line, that end customer is an actual person. And how are you helping people get closer to that?
Yeah. And how are you helping that end customer? Creating value for them, as you said. It's easy for me in this scenario. As hard as it is, it's easy because I know what those inherent skills are and I know what the value is. And as an entrepreneur, I can spin up another business. I mean, AI disrupts an industry. I own one of our businesses as a development business with partners of mine, mostly engineering. And we've done great. The last 8 years have just been pure growth, right? And we grew this amazing team. We have this beautiful culture as a business. We've spent blood, sweat, and tears on building the business. But that said, AI disrupts an industry. I can start up an AI version of that business.
Yeah.
And so
you still got the relationships.
I still have the
maybe
relationships.
You're not developing websites. Maybe you're developing GPTs, whatever the thing is, the thing shifts. What you do changes, but how you do it and why you do it will last a bit longer.
Yeah. And I mean, we're already in the process of starting an AI enablement business for the same sorts of clients.
Which that's a new problem they have. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And they don't know how they're going to replace us. They know that they can, supposedly their perception is that they can, but they don't know exactly how. And so that's another problem that we can solve. So I didn't look at it like, screw you guys, you've given me notice, it's over. I looked at it like, actually, this is another opportunity for me. The problem that I've found, and I've had to have these conversations already, and your books helped along the way. The reality is there are people who are tied to the identity of the role that they're playing. So that classic scenario of don't become the work that you do. They believe that they are engineers and the way that they currently do it is what they're supposed to do. And so a lot of them are still in denial. And we're talking about years of conversations. This is not new. No. When AI first, comes into the picture, everybody's talking about it. And in some of those conversations, and it's been tough. I'll level with you. It's been really hard because I've realized I've been talking about it with everybody until I said to them, but what happens now when technically, if our client says that you're replaceable, I can't charge for that same service? What happens? And the surprise on their faces, in spite of the conversations to date, has really bothered me. Like, it's kept me up at night, because I saw it coming and I was planning for it. I'm still worried that I haven't done enough to inform people, to speak about it. And it surprises me even still that my peers, people who own businesses like mine, similar businesses, they've been talking about it for a long time. It's really hard to get out of the habits. Behavior change is more than just knowing, right? Like, they understand, they know, but they haven't actually done anything about it. And like you said, it's a time for action. So in that time, right now, I understand, as you said, smaller scale, taking a step back, maybe to take 2 steps forward. I hope I'm an optimist. Sitting down with the client, understanding how to build that value for them. Let's go back to the comment that you made around the advertising industry and the marketing industry. So I play a role there, and it's been, most of my career has been spent, even when we have been an engineering company, we're doing it with marketing. What's your prediction? What's your scenario? How much do you think that industry contracts for all those, tasks that you referred to earlier as being more replaceable? What do you think the contraction looks like there? Well,
the advertising industry has spent like the last generation getting out of the diamond business and into the water business, basically. And they're going to find the pool is quite shallow. So now you have to get back into the diamond business, which is quite hard. But the advertising industry is a beautiful example too, because it's also a classic example of an industry that gets really, really big and then consolidates and then sort of implodes upon its own scale and size, because it's so expensive to run with those sort of models, and new sort of startups come on board. The challenge is how quickly they sort of figure out, all those various different players figure out what their actual value is. If your value is, creating 7 slightly different images to go onto a carousel to spray and play across, social media, that's not going to be super valuable, because AI can absolutely do that. Even the free versions can do that, no problem. But if it is sort of figuring out again how to differentiate commoditized products, which is going to be a problem for everyone. Every brand is going to have this competition issue hits all of that. So I'm sure you've seen how, it's no longer embarrassing to wear dupes. It's, if anything, a status symbol so that you've got something back from the man. Like, how do you deal with that as a brand? Well, that's where sort of agencies could help again, figuring out what that actually looks like. But I think the scale is not on the side of agencies that have scaled, for the water business, for the low margins, high volumes industry of social media and digitization. But the value is still there, like it always was, because that's the beautiful thing about the sort of Ricardian nature of a functional competitive market, is that people can distribute labor. Like, you could do what you do best and I can do what I do best. And by trading together, we can both be more successful. But agencies are going to have to figure out very quickly what their actual value is. And I'm telling you, it's not prompting GPTs, because the ladies who work in marketing and the brand side can do that too.
And you hinted at it earlier in terms of the art of the idea, the creativity, the storytelling.
It's always been there. It's like we just ignored that because it made more sense to chase performance marketing, which is like hilarious to me. Like, there was a reason that even in organizations, marketing and sales are complementary but not substitutory sort of products. And the temptations are there, but we all know this.
I've also felt the pressure. I mean, yeah, and it's not just the temptation. The temptation has always been.
The market for water is bigger than the market for diamonds too, right?
Yeah, and it's we want water now. We don't want diamonds. Like, just give us this thing. Like, when an industry decides, everybody at the same time. Now it's all about what we can measure. I came into, in my career, I've spent most of it in social media, digital marketing, wanting to tell a story and being forced to measure conversion. And that, the reality of that is, again, the market dictates like what you end up having to do. And if you want a piece of that pie, that's what you've got to take. And now it's the swings and roundabouts. It's come in the other direction, where if you haven't been practicing the art of storytelling, if you're unable to do that,
if you've forgotten, much harder.
Yeah. So, and replaceable, again, let's let's go to the topic of the bullshit job, and without sounding insensitive, after the conversation that we've just had already, the term, as far as I read, it was David Graeber.
Yes.
Came up with this term for bullshit jobs. You use it.
Got a whole book on it.
Yeah.
It's a more intense book than our book.
Okay.
But if you like a chunky academic book, you should read it.
Okay. Chunky academic intense, because there's intense bits in this book too. But okay. So bullshit jobs, define it for us and give me.
Well, first a moment for David, because he did kind of inspire the work that we did in all of Sharon and My's conversations. He was also the instigator behind the Occupy Wall Street movement, just if you want to get a sense of who David is. Sort of like date the first 5,000 years. Really interesting thinker, because he's not an economist, but he wrote about economic issues a lot. You should look up David. He had some really interesting, sort of not quite head-on takes into the world. But when it comes to bullshit jobs are best described by what they're not. So there's two types of sort of bad jobs. There's shit jobs and bullshit jobs. Shit jobs are jobs that are underpaid but necessary. You probably employ some people to do shit jobs for you. It's the stuff you don't want to do. It's changing grandma's diaper. It's digging holes in your garden. It's washing your dishes. Looking after your own children. These are shit jobs. They're jobs that we don't pay very well as society, but they're very necessary. They're also kind of hard to automate, but they are real work. They are clearly real value. You'll pay just about anything not to have to change your own grandmother's diaper, right? You will pay the money. You will do it. It's real work. There's a value to it. Bullshit jobs are the opposite. They are often very well paid, but they don't add value. They're what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. They extract value rather than adding it. And these are the people who are at risk in any sort of particularly competitive cycle. In times when there's a lot of money floating around, like there was just after COVID, when, the Americans dropped all their helicopter money and there was plenty of money swimming around, there was lots of fertile ground for bullshit jobs to perpetuate, right? When things contract, when we have real scarcity, when, there's things in the Middle East that cause the petrol price to go up and the economy gets a bit slower, the tide washes out a bit. Bullshit jobs are the ones that are exposed to contractions. They're the people that are getting let go now-ish. These are jobs that are overpaid, but quite easy. They're like the polar opposite of a shit job. Overpaid, not underpaid, valueless work instead of valuable work. And much of our white-collar economy is made up of these jobs. So there was one that this week, we've been speaking as long as I've been working, people have been talking about how we need to get estate agents and travel agents out of the economy because they just take like a toll, and you can find a better flight than the guys at the travel agent will give you for a cheaper price. They're just extorting you, and the estate agent is only there because of bureaucracy, but they don't actually deserve 10% of the value of your house. So what are they charging out? 13%, some of them? Clearly not. There was a guy in the New York Times, a journalist. He got a chatbot to fulfill the role of his estate agent, help him with all paperwork. So he saved 13% of the value of his house, which is a massive amount of money. And some people are like, how can you do that? You stole a job. But actually, that's probably a job that should be taken. If it can be now replicated, that's a huge amount of value. 13% of the value of your house, regardless of your actual income bracket, is a huge saving to everyone. That's money that can be spent elsewhere on real stuff. So that's an example of a really classic example of where there's sort of BS in the system. But you find it all over, especially large organizations where bureaucracy grows, where you've got layers and layers of processes, where you've got more bureaucrats than you do workers. The classic example there is in the healthcare systems, where if you've looked at those charts, I know economic charts are boring to most people, but if you look at the percentage of people working in healthcare that are actual doctors and nurses, how they have shrunk compared to the numbers of lawyers and accountants in hospitals, and you wonder why medical inflation is what it is. You kind of look at this. It's because people are suing each other, or there's paperwork to be filled out, there's new regulations. There's clearly more fat in the system than there needs to be. It's clearly extracting value, not adding value. The fact that there was 2 accountants that had to check your admission papers doesn't actually, improve the quality of your appendix removal, right? These are things that add fat. So that's what essentially bullshit jobs are. They're jobs that shouldn't necessarily exist. And there's the other point is that quite a lot of people seek these jobs out. These are good jobs to have. They're jobs where you don't have to do much. I mean, maybe you heard the lazy girl jobs movement. You can go follow little girls on TikTok. They'll tell you how to do it. Get a job that you don't have to work too hard at, but still maintain your lifestyle. They are jobs that are expressly designed to extract. Often you find them in consultancies too, who diagnose problems and sell solutions to the problems that don't quite work, and then diagnose their own problems to their own solutions and end up never leaving your organization. I like to talk about therapists too. That annoys people quite a lot, but therapist is not incentivized to get you healthy. They're incentivized, to keep you in the system. But, I'm sure there's definitely reasons why people might need those services some of the time. But essentially, when you're paying for things that you don't need, whether you're a customer, an employer, or a contractor, that's what we're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. And it struck me when you said therapist, not just because
I'm not supposed to say that, but I can't help myself.
You are welcome to say it. My therapist might feel upset by me discussing this now, but I tell her everything, so I might as well tell you how I feel about it. I firmly believe if you show me the incentive, if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the behavior. I'll show you what happens, right? And the reality is, even when I know that, I've kind of always known that about my therapist.
But if you're getting value out of the chat, that's all good, because you had a good time and you felt good. You see, then you had a good exchange there. You might not feel the same way about, the Big Four consultant that comes in and gives you another PowerPoint presentation. You might not actually feel like you got value out of that interchange.
The felt experience still has value.
It still has value. The intangible intrinsic still has value. So if you are enjoying it, then by all means, and you feel good about paying for it, that's great.
I wouldn't say I always enjoy therapy, but I still feel like I have to go.
Feels like valuable when you left. I got my money's worth.
Yeah. You've got this history with the marketing industry that we discussed, and I pushed you for a prediction. I'd love to nudge you again on that. Like, if you could give me a percentage, how much do you think of this industry and your understanding of it? I mean, I won't hold you to it. If I had to put you at gunpoint and say, give me a percentage as to how much the advertising and marketing industry contracts because people perceive it to be replaceable, what do you think it looks like?
Well, it's a bit of you defining contracting in terms of like economic terms or in terms of like jobs. I think probably there'll be less of the job losses in the marketing space overall than there would be in some of the other comparable industries. But financially speaking, if you're looking at the piece of middlemen in the agency space, whether that's across PR, across all your digital, across everything else, there's going to be a large contraction in the short term. As I said, these things go in cycles. They'll be coming back. I could probably see that whole industry could contract in financial terms easily, but by about 50% in the short term. Remember, of course, all your clients have just overspent on their IT budgets, and they will need to trim fat. And the best way to do that is to cut marketing and headcount. So that's going to happen. Like, I don't see that there's a way around that. But as far as the people, the sorts of persons that work in that are probably less vulnerable than the sorts of persons who are working in your engineering roles and your development roles, if you're looking at the actual individuals. Because a lot of that budget will end up flowing back to businesses themselves. I think internal departments, we can see the trend is currently in one of those sort of like going more in-house directions. In any case, they will be hiring some people to do that. Marketing, even when digitized, is still quite a labor-intensive sport. But it doesn't necessarily need an agency in the middle if the agency is not seen as the brain. So the challenge is for agencies to see themselves, to recarve a position for themselves in the market where they're positioned as brain and not as cost and execution. Because cost and execution can be done by cheaper employees in-house.
It's an analogy we've used a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. We have to be seen as the brains and not the hands. And it's a much more
valuable space.
Yeah.
Less clients, yes. There's not everyone's in the market for that, but they're the sorts of clients that you want to work with for longer.
But higher value and
the biggest contractions will be in those very large agencies, because the models just work that you work on like a short-term contract. It's a few years at a time. You bring in the headcount, you bring it down. There's not going to be money to pay those sorts of things at the moment, given what's happening with the general market.
Why shouldn't we use Claude?
I mean, you can use Claude if you want, but I think Anthropic is a has understood human psychology quite well, and they are trying very hard to get you to believe that they're magic.
It's in the name.
Yes, it's designed to be magical, yes, to feel magical. So the more time people spend with that particular chatbot, the more delusional they become about reality. It's my personal observation. Work with one of the nastier bots that like behaves like a computer, so you don't end up losing your sanity in the process.
I've experimented with all the, as you can imagine,
it's designed
the day-to-day
to make you feel,
and it's
very deliberately, which is very manipulative.
It does,
and their marketing and advertising strategy just confirms that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they got the Pope to mention them, you know.
I've had some of the most rational people, the most pragmatic people, come to me and say
You've been
things
manipulated.
like. You know what's funny is the opposite, Bronwyn. I've had people come to me and say, I really like those Claude guys because they stand up against the big guy. You know, like they feel like they're the underdog. And that's like a classic positioning strategy.
That's why you need a marketing agency. Like that's why you need an agency on your side, because they've got very good marketing.
I have noticed a lot of these AI CEOs are changing their tune a little bit, at least. Like the broader message over the last 2 years has been, this disrupts, this destroys jobs. We're going to take your jobs with the platform. We're making it for that. It does feel like they're easing back on that sort of narrative. Especially
Anthropic. They buddied up with all the the humanities departments graduates, and they've told journalists how clever they are, and journalists have been responding by saying the same thing.
Yeah. So sleight of hand.
It's hard not to notice how blatant it is, but it is a marketing play. You got to respect the grift.
Yeah. What industries and what sort of offering are you most optimistic about? What's the opposite of like the bullshit job? What are the industries that you see growing and not contracting?
Well, there's always the two answers, because there's the small sliver of the big companies that take outsized gains, and that is your large tech companies. Ironically, I don't know that Anthropic is going to be the biggest winner out of that bunch. I think the ones that you have to watch are the ones that are already systemically integrated with large-scale public and private sector enterprises. Not to promote any stocks, you can do the maths, because this is how economies of scale work, especially after hype cycles. And money tends to money, like tends to like. There will be very big winners in the tech space. This is not going anywhere. We tend to have these conversations myopically over our middle class white collar jobs. So we need to take a step back and remember those of us working in the Zoom economy, as I refer to us, are a very small part of the global economy. And quite frankly, very few people care other than us. But we do care because we used to be privileged and well paid, and now we're not. So it's very personal, but it's a very small part of the economy. The large scale sort of developments that these platforms will enable are enormous. And people can say they're burning through all this energy and they're very expensive to run. I don't know if you've noticed, but your government can like literally just print money, okay? And if you see this as a strategic defense asset, there is unlimited budgets to support the select companies that will be, monitoring and measuring and optimizing everything on the monetary side and the political side of our economy. Not to be too dystopian, but it's nice work if you could get it. They're not going to be hiring as many engineers as they used to. They've already used you. Thanks. You're now discarded. We can do that ourselves. But the few winners in those rock star careers and industries will do just fine. At the same time, people who have village jobs are doing great. This is how I'm referring to it now. Like everybody needs to have a village job. Like we already spoke. I get to be the court jester. You got to have one of those in your village. What's your village job? You've got the preacher, you got the goat herd, you got the ballet teacher, you got the baker, like you got a village job, which is a real job, which is only 1 degree removed from the actual end user. You can have your white collar job, but that's going to be an ever shrinking kind of, tail eating snake. You figure out your village job. Those are the people who are doing very, very well at the moment. Like my business partner, Dion, talks about the pets economy. I mean, it's sickening how much money people are spending on their pets. But that's a real thing. That the value's in the eye of the beholder. And that's very tangible. Figure out your village job. The village job people are doing great at the moment. And it's not all plumbers. I know people love to talk about the plumbers. You don't have to become a plumber.
Thank you.
It's not required. You don't have to have a literal shit job. Okay.
I'm really not good at that.
You don't have to. They're also going to be fine, but not everyone needs to be.
you've built a career around helping people feel less afraid of the future. But what scares you most about the future?
That's a very surprising description. I always thought I did the opposite, that I made a living scaring people about the future enough that they would actually do something about it, which does kind of answer the second question, which is what scares me the most about the future. And that is people not acting for what they want. Something that I've been saying quite a lot lately is that we as humanity get exactly what we want. We're very good at it. We started this conversation talking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I saw the picture, me standing on a stage, me standing behind the stage, being the spy, being the rock star. I got exactly what I wanted, but not necessarily what I really wanted, right? We do this as humans. We want to be gods. We create our tools, our devices. We want to live forever. We figure out the drugs. We want to be thin. We make Ozempic. We get what we want. And that is scary when what we want is not being effectively voted for by everyone, or when we cast our vote to kind of go along with what we believe to be a sort of deterministic future. So that's a fancy way of saying the scariest thing about the future is the default future, where we all just like, oh, well, we go along with it. And we're getting a lot of what we want at the moment, which is terrifying. I'm just not sure how many of us have thought about what we want as individuals, what does we want. And I'm not sure a lot of people have the agency, enough people have the agency to act against the sort of default future that we sort of walk towards. So fear of the future is fear of people not using agency, which is why I try to scare people.
Yeah,
I don't want you not to be scared about the future. I would really like you to be a bit more scared. Not that it's not going to be okay, but that there's more than okay.
What I think I'm hearing you say is if we aren't a little bit afraid, we're not going to make it okay.
Yeah.
Like we have to actually do something, take agency, take action. If you had to paint a picture of that dystopian future, what movie is it like? What book is it like? What's the sci-fi description?
I don't think we've got it, and they wouldn't make a movie out of it because effectively it's boring. We're already halfway there. Like I'm old enough to remember the pre-internet days, giving my age away. Don't remember many days without the internet, but still, what we have done in my lifetime at least, is we've homogenized everything. There's actually no point on going on holiday anywhere in the world. It's the same everywhere. The tourists have found it. It's boring. People wear the same clothes everywhere you go. We've heard about the airspace phenomena. And this is what happens when you get what you want. When you get rich enough, apparently we all choose the same thing and we all choose the same face. We all choose the same clothes. We all choose the same boyfriend. And if he's not the same boyfriend, we pay for him to get his legs lengthened so he can be the same as everyone else's boyfriend. We literally get what we want, which is incredible. We will literally break our legs and smash our faces so we can all look the same and be the same. So the future that we're sort of stumbling towards, this is very homogenous, very equitable future, but a very dull future where equity and equality is enforced through very seemingly benign, or at least banal technologies that give us what we think we want, which is probably not very ambitious at all. We being the lowest common denominator, democratic majority. And we don't have to make decisions. And we get the boring president. And we don't get any more cathedrals because they're too expensive and it's better spent on, bike lanes or whatever they're putting in Europe. And it's a very flat, very boring, very dull, very safe future, but very sterile too. It really literally is becoming sterile. You must have noticed you're not having so many babies anymore. And no, it wasn't the phones. It was because we didn't want babies. Now we don't have to have them because we have birth control and education. So the future we want is the majority, lowest common denominator, democratic mean it's just very banal. I call it the banal dystopia. It's globalized, homogenized, very long.
How long does that last for, do you think, before it swings the other way? I just want to know how bad it is and how long.
Rock. Well, according to generational turning theory, we can probably look towards roughly the end of the century before we reinvent a bit of anarchy.
I don't think I can wait that long.
Well, that's my point. So if that like really not scary future is scaring you, just go make a choice. And don't ask Claude what that choice should be, because he's going to tell everyone the same thing.
It will make that future.
Yes.
Wow. Let's go back to the punk rock. What rock star did you want to be when you were a kid? Did you have anyone in particular in mind?
No, not at all.
No,
it was just me. It was me.
Okay.
I did write my own songs. I was sure I got this.
Great. Yeah. Do you still write your own songs?
I do write my own songs. I even did make money as a band singer, I suppose, at some point. I told you I was a music teacher, but I did as along my many checkered ways of making money when I was a student, I suppose.
What type of music was that?
It was I can't say it was actual rock music. It was not.
Okay. So close to
I did
yacht.
Try.
It sounds like yacht rock, like somewhere around there. That's cool. That's back in fashion. So it's not over for you. You can bring that career up anytime you like.
I might do that. The next
not
pandemic,
that you need my
next
permission,
time we're stuck at home.
Do it. Yeah, that's great. I paid my way through my student loan, teaching guitar lessons.
Yeah.
In bands, didn't get paid for it. I think if anything, it cost
quite a few of those corporate gigs, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the bands I played in, I think we barely scraped by. We managed to collect some door fees, but most of the time we just kind of got the drinks tab. Like, you guys can come and just have some beers and play for us, and we were very happy with that. We didn't ever question that. We were I'm very pleased. So that's the level of rock stardom that I managed to hit. I hear a theme all the way through your work, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this book in particular, a lot of what you said, the common thread for me really feels like it's about you encouraging people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like there's an element of like, if you choose the easy way, if you choose what you think you want, as you were saying earlier, and you're given it, that's not the future that we actually need. We should do something different to that. And how do you get people to see that? Like, I understand your work is about that, but like if you're on stage, if you're presenting this work, if you're writing these books, like, knowing it is not half the battle. How do people actually change their behavior? Like,
yeah. Well, see, this is also why I'm like a outsider jester rather than a successful business consultant, because when people do actually spend time interrogating the sorts of things we speak about, people come to that conclusion on their own. Because the thing is, we all had strange and weird dreams when we were small children. I certainly never dreamt about being a business consultant. Like that was never my dream. I wanted to be on stage, like being cool. And most people don't actually want deep down the job that they have. They just think it's either the best they're going to get or it's the safe bet, the safe choice. The safe choice is this really boring future we're heading towards. And very few people are doing their actual life's passion. Now, there are a few, and these are the people who are not going to change. They're still going to be the person that is still hand coding, doing his artisanal coding of replica websites of the good old days of the internet. And you know what? That's fine too, because there's artisans that still do stuff that we don't have to do because we got machines to do that for. Those people are going to be okay. But most people we're talking to here that want to feel safe, once they understand that it's actually safer in the water than it is on the boat because the boat is going down, people are happy to move. But people also have to understand, like, it's a question of mortality, ultimately. I mean, we are like, meat sacks and flawed vessels on like a terrible spaceship, that's doomed at some point to implode along with the sun and the universe. You've only got so much time here. Was it really your dream to, be the second keeper, or to be a creator of PowerPoint presentations. It probably wasn't. And when you think about it like that, the people that are happiest in their careers are the people that are actually adding value somewhere. Like I was saying today, like the baker and the ballerina are fine. They're not scared about AI, and they're doing something because they were hopefully passionate about it and they enjoyed it and they were adding value and they're going to be okay. And once people understand that, like what was your other thing? And like we do quite a lot of work. It often turns out like the women, I don't know if you noticed, the women are dropping out of work at the moment. We were getting towards gender parity, and now all the like women are like, they don't have children, but they also don't want the job. Like what is happening to the women? A lot of the women want to go and like, run an organic farm. They don't actually want to work in an office in a pen. But people don't often have the opportunity to say that out loud. Like their therapist is probably telling them to like, calm down and, work towards the next promotion. They're not saying, well, just burn it all to the ground. Maybe that's okay too. Like there's not much to lose. I don't know if I'm making too much sense, because this is why, again, I'm not hired by companies for very long times. I'm not usually allowed to talk to the employees for very long. It's like, you can leave now. That's enough. But that's the point. People do understand this. Once you talk to someone like a human being, not like a worker. A lot of the angst around this and the miscommunication is on our absolute obsession over the units of human labor known as the job. It's attached to our value, it's attached to our identity, it's attached to our economic plans, like government points out, but it's not a great allocator of value. Like you were talking earlier about your employees who you'd spoken to, but they weren't hearing the message. It's because they see you as their keeper. They don't see themselves as valuable. Most of us have not been taught that we're valuable. We've been taught, go find a job, go find someone to look after you. That's like one step up from telling people, go find a government to give you a grant. Like that's not an aspiration for me. I'm not losing sleep over people losing jobs. I'm losing sleep over people losing their houses, losing their income, losing their ability to look after themselves. But the job, I think, is getting in the way of a whole lot of this. And that's part of the message in this book. But if there's one piece of advice, that's how you kind of know who you're going to be working with in the future. Maybe you have an employment agreement. Maybe it is stable, but does that person see themselves as the holder of a job, or do they see themselves as a contributor of value in a team? Are they a citizen of your organization that has agency and contributes and understands that, skipping out early and working at half speed is not good for them or anyone else? Or are they just there, to pick up as much paycheck for as little time? So I don't know if I've answered your question very well, but that's really the point. The mindset is getting out of that job mindset is not impossible. When you're asking people to let go of their income, it's very different. But when you're saying, don't focus on the job, focus on the actual piece of work that you are doing that matters and who you want to be and the contribution that you want to make, and go find something valuable, not something exploitative. And that's the other piece, like, especially if you've got children or younger people and you're not already like so far down your career where you're like, I can just take early retirement. I'm not ready to deal with this. I'm not trained for it. Like, what is the messages you're telling to each other, to your colleagues, to the people you work with you about what success looks like? We say success looks like getting a job and hanging on to it. Whereas if you say it's a different piece, success is figuring out what value you add to someone. Like if you told that to children for 12 years at school, we were told for 12 years at school, go to university and get a job. Your whole point is the whole reason you're at school is to learn how to get a job. Instead, if we took all that time and just said, your job is to figure out what value you add, that's as simple as it is. Mm. That's not half as hard. It's only hard when you so sort of institutionalized into thinking the job is as good as it gets. And it certainly isn't. Like once you've told people that, like, do you really think this is the best life you could be living? I mean, you come into this building in Sanson and you sit in your cubicle next to that guy with his tin of tuna. Is this really the life you envisage for yourself? Then it's a lot easier to let go of that.
What's your own relationship like with uncertainty? And like, I've never had a real job. I have no idea what that's like. My relationship with uncertainty, I would describe as like when things feel very certain and I know exactly what the future looks like, it's already banal to me, right? Like I'm seeking high amounts of variety in my life. I love new challenges. I started an agency because I hated the idea of doing the same thing all the time. Sometimes I have to do that. Sometimes I do have to look at spreadsheets and use my BCom. But for the most part, my life is uncertain because I'm an entrepreneur and I chose that. And I enjoy it. What's your relationship like with uncertainty?
Yeah, I'm like a very risk adverse, but also like very uncertainty seeking person. Like I can't do routine. I can't do the same thing twice. I don't want to solve the same problem that I've solved before. But I do understand most people are not like that. Most people like to do the same thing many times over. But the world goes in phases. The world wasn't good for people who were not good at staying in the box up until quite recently. And now it's going to be not very good for people who are looking for the safety of a box. So the world shifts in terms of where that sort of overall value, or the value's the wrong word there, where the sort of the weight of momentum shifts towards. It's a good time to be okay with uncertainty. It's also a time where you kind of have to be okay with uncertainty. But at the same time, there is a certainty in that you're on the right track. Whereas for a long time, a lot of our generations were told it was stupid, it was unwise to accept that you should chase safety. But the point here is that there is no safety, that the places that were the safest are now the least safe places to be. Because think about it, someone that has had a checkered entrepreneurial past, you're not scared of losing your job. You might be scared of losing this client or this deal, but then you're on to the next thing and you understand how to deal with that. Whereas if you haven't had to look for a job in the last 30 years, you've been working in the same position with the same title, and that title is no longer available anywhere, you are absolutely unequipped to deal with the world there. So I use that like the house cat analogy. So obviously it's better for an animal to be free, to go and climb the trees, to do the rest of it. But this animal has been kept inside a house with like the fancy pet, thing on the wall. It's never been allowed to touch grass. And now you're like, I've opened the door, go be free. That's terrifying. Whereas if you were raised outside, it was awful the first time you had to get your paws wet, but now you're okay. So we have to have empathy for those sorts of people. But part of our contention is businesses are doing exactly the wrong thing by promising people, just do like another skills training course, you'll be fine, or not being honest about the shifting sand. Like you're doing people a huge favor by telling you this is not going to be a space where you're going to be valuable in the future, you have to move. And this is something Sharon also deals with a lot. A lot of her work is in restructuring organizations. And she's constantly depressed about how people don't want to change, even when she says this is how you change. All you have to do is step here, do this, and here you can see what the future can look like, and people don't want to move. And that's something, don't have answers for that, but hopefully if you're listening to this, you understand that you don't really have a choice now, for the most part, unless you're one of Elon Musk's kids and you haven't been disinherited.
Or he happens to want to start adopting. If you're still listening, Elon, I'm open to it. Yeah. Do you ever apply your own frameworks and models as a futurist to your own life? Like, are you applying them to your career? Are you applying this thinking like to the way that you manage Flux with your partner you mentioned earlier, Dion Chang? Like, are you applying these models and this thinking in your own day to day?
And again, it hasn't been easy. Like we've had to restructure our team to a point that, yes, if you're working with us, you're working as an independent contractor with that mindset. We're not going to be employing people. We don't need people to do basic admin for us. We need partners to work with. It's hard to get people to understand that. Not everybody wants to make that journey. A lot of people still seek the safety of the security that you can't provide. I think it's not right to promise security when you can't, just like with any sort of personal relationship too. So this is who I am. You can't change the scorpion. You don't change the frog. You are what you are. Obviously you can work on yourself and improve, but your basic core nature is, if you are someone that likes uncertainty and change and likes to move and travel and go different directions, you're not going to be happy with someone who doesn't want to move with you, right? Or that wants to stay the same. So you have to surround yourself with the sorts of people that are willing to think like that. And that is very much how I've structured all the various different partners that I work with on different things. And understanding, of course, that not having just one thing is also really important. I think a lot of South Africans understand this. We all know about side hustles and second incomes and all the rest of it. But having that mindset that your worth is not tied up with one thing, that you can be many things, is certainly something I've approached life to always, really.
Yeah, and I've seen that really becoming and I don't know if it's just my social media algorithm, but I've seen a lot of content creators talk about having these diverse interests and finding ways to get diverse interests to overlap. You talked about being a generalist, as an example. I'd classify myself as being a generalist. Like, it's very hard for me to just stick to one thing. I have so many different interests. The beauty is in the overlap and how they're all intersecting. And it feels like placing a bet to me when I say, I'm going to go out and, like, if you told me go out and study engineering, even 20 years ago, it didn't feel right for me because I wanted so much more variety. I've got too many other interests. Like, I'm really interested in it. I'd like to read a book, but I don't know if I can
dedicate the next 15 years of your life to one track.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of this kind of like a generalist economy.
Well, you don't have to be a generalist, though. There's still plenty of room for specialists, with specialists who are specialists in a real thing. Like, your doctors are going to be fine. You might not need quite as many of those frontline GPs, but that's even not true because people want to talk to a doctor. It's just like figuring out what your actual value is. And there's many professions in your real engineering space. I'm sorry, coders, but the hardcore engineering, like the building has to stand up, that you need people on the ground to figure these things out. There are definitely roles for specialists and specialists that aren't super educated either, like your specialists who know how to tie knots or teach yoga or whatever the case is. There's many things that you can be doing. There's a lot of people on this planet. There's probably someone that will buy whatever it is that you're into if you are a super sort of specialist. But there's also space for those generalists, right? And the generalists will often move a lot more than the specialist and try different things. But they are different tracks. So basically the point there is that if you are someone that's looking for security, you need to pick one of those village jobs real quick. You're not going to find security in the digitized, financialized economy. That space becomes a space of generalists who can move and shift and reskill and change along the way. So there's always roles for everyone, but where those roles are, different spaces these days.
You've spoken about South Africa in the past and some of the writing that I've read of yours and my research with a lot of love, some trepidation, frustration. You seem to have the sort of profile and the work that you do is relevant everywhere. It's not just relevant in this country. What makes you stay in South Africa, in Joburg, in Africa?
It's a particularly bad place to do the work that I'm doing. This place, there's not a lot of demand for the work that I do, which is as I said, it's an entertainment service for the elite largely, but it is probably the best place to develop source material. So whether or not those dots are connected, there is a lot that South Africa can teach the rest of the world, and in a lot of ways, we are further into the future in a lot of directions.
Yeah, I see that, like a leapfrogging.
Yes. Well, not even leapfrogging. Leapfrogging, I think, is wrong because I think the benefits of jumping over the digital divide are probably exactly the last thing that Africa needs at this point in time. I think that informal economy is doing just fine, and the less we try formalize it, the more it will flourish. There's something worse than over-regulating a barely growing economy, but that's a separate point. It's more that from a societal perspective, this place has tested the limits of essentially the liberal world order in every direction. Limits which are being tested in much of the rest of the wealthy world. We've spoken mostly about companies and careers here today, but the same sort of challenges of competition, of digitization are putting pressure on societies across the world too. And South Africa is, I think, an interesting place to look at what the future can hold for a lot of other countries, as sooner or later that competition translates into the real world once again. Because these conversations around unearned privilege are more geographic than they are, across our very small strata of our middle class economy, which is where we all are, because we're all scared and panicking in our little spot. But in the broader sense, those same levers of competition are rechanging societies. And I think we are, in many senses, a preview as to what many other societies are going to become more like over the next century. So if you try, coming back to my banal dystopia, think about waterfall estate forever.
It's hard for me to picture. At the same time, I can't picture it.
You can see the walls and the drones and the homogenous building.
Yeah, I couldn't cope. Do you believe in luck?
Yeah, of course. Like there's always a chance, but more than that, I do believe in free will, which comes back to the agency point. So most of it is chance or set course, but even a very small degree of freedom makes it all worthwhile.
Okay, so not strictly deterministic. Do you believe in karma?
I hope so. I was just joking today that I have a pay-as-you-go relationship with karma. Don't accrue debts on either side.
Very nice. I've really enjoyed this, Bronwyn. I've learned so much. The notes are just like I bought a new notebook and it's already looking quite full. I've really appreciated this time with you. We've spoken about everything from getting certain about the fact that there's just so much uncertainty right now. We've spoken about this homogenized everything everywhere all at once, that banal dystopia. We've also spoken about a lot of the things that make me feel quite optimistic, about my own businesses, my own endeavors, the things that I'm doing, the people who are working with me. We've gone on a long and winding conversation, and I've enjoyed every minute. I always try to kind of connect all the dots. I mentioned being comfortable with, getting uncomfortable. And it feels to me like the theme around that is like, if we keep getting what we want, as you said, instead of actually doing what we need to do, practicing these things, putting them into practice to create some sort of value in the world. The outcome, won't actually be something that we all want, at least not something that sounds like I want. So, the one thing that's also stuck with me as a litmus test for myself is less extractive, more abundance in my thinking as to how I add value and create value in the world. Like
mutually beneficial exchange. It's a good, healthy way to look at capitalism, growth, our place in it, whatever your value set. If people are enriched from interacting with you, if your employees are learning something beyond their paycheck, if your suppliers and your customers are satisfied, that's a good, healthy economy.
Fabulous. I hope they will are if they're listening. Let me know if you're not. Thank you, Bronwyn. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a lovely conversation. You might want to tell the audience as well about where they can get the book and what's next for you. Like what should they be expecting? Where can they find you?
Well, you can find me in most of the places. I'm not very hard to find. Bronwyn Williams on most of the social platforms, or Flux Trends is the business. The next book I'm working on, hopefully, will be picked up by a publisher in the next couple of weeks, is looking at the thesis of South Africa as that front row seat to the future. So it's a bit more going back to my stuff, which is on the other book there, as opposed to our deviation into the emergency world of work at the moment, which is looking at essentially what are those liberal values that are worth taking with us, that we should not be throwing away with the baby and the bathwater, as we rightfully, as we talk about with the AI apocalypse, challenge unearned piles of privilege, which is a really interesting, I think, conversation to have. It's probably going to sound very badly, but it'll make me very happy. So
That's what really matters. I look forward to speaking to you again when that is out, and I'm looking forward to reading it too. Thank you, Bronwyn.
The Never Think Alone podcast is brought to you by my tech and experience design agency, Plus Narrative. Plus Narrative has been focused on people-first development, design, and strategy since 2013. I'm a little biased, but if you have an innovation, user experience, or software project brief, or you just need a trained strategist to facilitate your next workshop, I cannot think of a better team to help. We're based in South Africa and Mauritius, so we work with clients and companies all over the world. If you want to find out more, go to plusnarrative.com. We'll put a link in the show notes too. That's plusnarrative.com.